Hi guys. We will back in Paris at 1919s. The cold winter air bites at the cheeks of diplomats and journalists crowding the streets. Within the gilded halls of the Palace of Versailles, a heavy sense of history and the lingering stench of war permeate the atmosphere. The Great War, the cataclysm that had consumed Europe and much of the world for 4 long years, was finally over. The armistice, signed in a railway carriage in the Compiègne forest in November 1918, had silenced the guns. Now, the world looked to Paris, the grand stage where the future of nations would be decided. This was the Peace Conference of 1919, a gathering unlike any before it, a global assembly convened to bind the wounds of a brutal war and forge a lasting peace. Delegates from nearly 30 victorious nations converged on the French capital. Their arrival was a spectacle of diplomatic pomp and profound diversity. From the seasoned diplomats of London and Tokyo to the earnest representatives of new, fledgling states, they all came with hopes, demands, and the collective weight of millions who had perished. The sheer scope of attendance underscored the war's global reach. Representatives from the British Dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa arrived, having earned their own seats at the table through immense battlefield sacrifice. Their presence marked a subtle but significant shift in the imperial dynamic. There were delegations from South American republics that had contributed raw materials and indirect support, a determined, if largely ignored, Arab delegation seeking a unified nation, and a young, relatively unknown man from French Indochina, Ho Chi Minh, who presented a petition for self-determination for his people, only to be politely but firmly brushed aside. Yet, despite this grand assembly, the real power was concentrated in the hands of a few. The conference quickly became a forum dominated by the Big Four, a quartet of leaders representing the principal victorious powers, first among them, President Woodrow Wilson of the United States. Wilson arrived in Europe not just as the leader of a burgeoning superpower, but almost as a messianic figure, greeted by rapturous crowds who saw him as the harbinger of a new world order. He was a man of high ideals, a Presbyterian elder with a belief in moral certitude. His 14 points were the blueprint for this new world: open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, disarmament, and, most crucially, the creation of a League of Nations to guarantee political independence and territorial integrity for all states, large and small. Wilson sought a peace without victory, a forward-looking settlement based on principle rather than revenge. Opposite him sat Georges Clemenceau, the Prime Minister of France. At 77 years old, the Tiger of France was a formidable and often fearsome figure. His perspective was forged by the grim reality of 2 German invasions in less than 50 years. He was pragmatic, cynical, and deeply patriotic. For Clemenceau, the primary goal was simple and unyielding: security for France. He demanded the Rhineland, massive reparations to rebuild his shattered nation, and the permanent weakening of German power. He had little patience for Wilson's idealistic principles, once reportedly quipping that God gave us the 10 Commandments, and we broke them. Wilson gives us 14 points. We shall see. Representing Great Britain was Prime Minister David Lloyd George, a shrewd, pragmatic Welshman known for his political agility. Lloyd George was the mediator, constantly seeking a middle ground between Wilson's idealism and Clemenceau's punitive demands. He had just won an election on the populist slogan of "Make Germany Pay," yet he understood that a completely ruined Germany would be a weak trading partner and a potential source of future instability in Europe. He sought a balance, ensure British imperial interests, particularly regarding German colonies and naval supremacy, while facilitating a European recovery. Finally, there was Italy's Prime Minister, Vittorio Orlando. Often overshadowed by the other 3, Orlando's primary focus was securing the territorial promises made to Italy in the secret Treaty of London in 1915, which had brought his country into the war. He wanted the lands of the Adriatic coast, Fiume, and other Austro-Hungarian territories. His demands would frequently clash with Wilson's principle of national self-determination, leading to moments of high tension and temporary walkouts. These four men, meeting often in the intimate setting of Clemenceau's study, bore the immense burden of reshaping the world. The complexity of the task was staggering. They had to draw new borders where empires had collapsed: the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, the German, and the Ottoman. They had to contend with the rise of communism in Russia, the demands of nationalism across Central and Eastern Europe, and the first stirrings of anti-colonial movements in Asia and Africa. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Behind closed doors, arguments were heated. Wilson sometimes threatened to go home. Clemenceau accused Lloyd George of being overly conciliatory. Orlando felt ignored. Maps were endlessly redrawn, populations shifted, and compromises made. Crucially, the defeated powers were excluded from these initial deliberations. Germany was presented with a completed treaty, a diktat, in May 1919, given little option but to sign. This exclusion, intended to prevent a drawn-out negotiation, sowed seeds of bitterness and resentment that would fester for decades to come. For 6 intense months, under the shadow of the recent war and an ongoing global influenza pandemic, the Big Four determined the fate of the world. The treaty that emerged, the Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was a deeply flawed and intricate compromise. It achieved some noble goals, establishing the League of Nations and new independent states, but it also imposed harsh terms and left many national aspirations unfulfilled, setting the stage for the next century of conflict.